All right. Well, I'm so excited to be back with all of you this week. It is going to be a special episode, one I've been waiting for a little bit. And I believe that God knows, and it is divine timing that it is supposed to be released right here, right now, not just into the world, but into your home and into your heart. So I want you to welcome my special friend, Tasha Ives. Hey, girl.
Hello.
How are you? I'm so glad that we're finally together and doing this.
I know there have been a couple of road bumps trying to get here to sit down together in a conversation, but that's life, right? That's kind of probably what we'll be talking about today, how it kind of throws you curveballs and you figure out, how to get things working, how to make them work.
Yep. And I also believe that it's not a surprise to God. So, like I said, I think this is going to be the perfect timing. And we've already been praying that this message would get to everyone that needs it.
Mhm.
And I'm believing that God's going to use this episode to bring some healing, some serious hope and encouragement. Because if you know me, you know that the reason I do this podcast is because I believe in you and I believe in your purpose. And I also know that life is really hard. And a lot of times there are things that get in the way. We get in our own way, and the enemy of our soul wants to steal, kill, and destroy and keep us from doing the things that God has created us to do. So we want to equip you today. And we're going to be talking about grief. Now, listen, pause right there before you decide to change episodes, because some of you avoid grief like the plague. Just gonna be honest with you, because not saying I'm married to someone who does that by any means. I would never say that. But maybe I know some people, right? And maybe you're Enneagram 7, and maybe you like to just have all the fun in the world and you avoid hard conversations and hard topics. I don't know. But you might know that about you. But I want to tell you this episode is for everyone today. Whether you've experienced deep grief in your life personally, or you've been around people who have, or around the corner, you will or they will. So here's the deal. This is a really important episode. I'm going to ask you to lean in and listen, regardless if you think you need it or not. Okay. So, Tosh, we go way back. We don't need to talk about how old we are, though I think, we're happy
We're
with what
okay.
we've
We're
been able
okay.
to do in our lives, right?
I'm 50. I'm going to say it. I'm 50 and I've known you for a long time. You're not there yet, but I mean, I met you in my 20s, right? Yeah.
Yep. We've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
So, we've had a few different seasons because we're both, from Rockford, Illinois, and I was born and raised there, and then I left for, I think it was 5 years or so, and then I came back and did ministry there, and you and I were really close, before we headed to Arizona and you headed to Tennessee and all the things. But if you don't know Tasha Ives, you need to get to know her. You need to follow her. She is such an encouragement and inspiration to me, not just online, but just as a friend and who she is when nobody's watching. And I want to tell you, I'm really excited because this new book is out that we've been waiting for. But again, God's divine timing, right?
Mhm.
And so it's called So Far, A Journey Through Grief and Beyond, a memoir by Tasha Ives. And though I know your story, Tasha, like rereading this book, some parts of it were hard for me. I grabbed my box of Kleenex in case I needed it today. I feel it already coming on a little bit. Because I have walked through some of it with you. And then also, grief is a companion of mine, has been for a long time. So, yeah, thank you for sharing vulnerably in your story. Thank you for being willing to turn your pain into purpose. And I'm excited to talk about this today. Tasha is an amazing wife, mom. She loves the Lord. She does many things now. She's an author, right? But she's also what I said, tell me this title so I get it right because
No,
it's
that's it.
so powerful,
Yeah.
right? I love it. But okay, so you're a bereaved parent advisor, educator, and mentor at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital,
Yes.
which that's awesome. I'm not
Yep.
sure who would have guessed that 25 years ago, right? But
No.
look what God has done. So I want to get into your story and not shy away from grief. And like I said, there's probably some people who are new to grief. Um, but, you know, for Tasha and I, grief has been a companion of ours, unwanted and not what we would choose. But regardless, it's something that's a part of our lives, and we're richer and stronger for it. And I believe that our goal is to be both like shining bright lights. Now, I'm tempted to say my grief doesn't compare to yours, but I already know what you would say. So why don't you tell everyone what, because they're going to feel, they might, a lot of them might feel the same way. And I want you to tell them what you always tell me when I'm tempted to compare our grief.
Yeah. So it's valid in your life, right? It's what's happening to you in this moment. And so it matters. And it might look different, but that doesn't mean there's a worse or a better involving grief. And so I think it's important for people to realize like if it's your current reality or a reality at any time in your life, that's real and that's valid. And I need to, we need to acknowledge that in each other. And I almost just put the hand up right away when someone, well, this isn't as bad as what you've walked through. It's relative, right? It's relative to what's happened in your life. And I definitely have moments in my life where I'll say, thank you, Jesus, because that person is going like, at least I'm not living in that. And thank you for walking me through what I'm going through in the moment. But I also, don't know what it's like to walk through some of the things you're walking through. And so I think if we can have a mutual understanding of our grief may look different right now, but it fills your life as much as it does mine, as much as mine does mine. And I think that makes kind of an even playing field, for lack of a better term. It just levels that. And we can just have a discussion once we get that part of it out of the way.
Yep. Yep. I love that. And I know we've been able to be there in different times for each other. So I'm grateful that we can have a little bit of coffee talk and real talk here
Yes.
today, because our goal is to be transparent and to be helpful. We want to be
Mhm.
helpful. Yes, God's done amazing things in our stories, but today we're here for you, listeners. We're here because we believe that we have some multiple things to share with you that are going to be really helpful for you. So take the ride with us. If you haven't tried out the YouTube version, come see us and watch us. And I do have to tell you today, I've got my teal on. This is my Sydney wink today. Sydney Love
Lovely.
Teal. And you're going to hear about Sydney here in a few minutes. But let's start talking today. Let's start with Christy. Can you tell me just a little bit of, I know grief, you lost family members like as they
Mhm.
got older and things like that, which is a little bit more
Sure.
common for some of us. But this entered your story and life would never be the same. Can you just bring the listeners in on kind of that part of your story?
Yeah, for sure. And this is around the time of my life where I met Dan, your husband, Dan, Gooseball Dan. But that's when I met him. So that was around that time. He was a mutual friend of mine and Christy. Christy, right? I met her when I was 16 years old, my first day at a new school. And kind of walking around like, what am I doing here? Everybody's kind of looking at me a little weird. And she just walked right up to me and said, hi, I'm Christy. And we were best friends from that moment on. And so she was, I say this as a pastor's daughter. I had good examples in my life. I have blessed to still have both of my parents, and they're still a great example to me. They've been real, imperfect, godly people, right? And so I always have loved the example they lived out. But Christy was the first person my age, right? Like a young person my own age at the age of 16. She would have been 15 at the time that I met, that just loved Jesus vibrantly, right? She just kind of exuded him from her life. And that really inspired me and kind of called me to want the same. And so we bonded really quickly at that time in 1990, that would have been. We graduated in 92. We were a big part of Cross Current, which was the youth group at the church that we all went to at the time. And Christy and I were just doing different little ministry things together. And we decided to take a drive we were getting ready to meet up with a bunch of our friends down at the underground. You know what I'm talking about, at the church. Underground offices is where we would always, at that time, pre-cell phones, we would tape a note to the door to tell people where we were hanging out so they could kind of come and know where everybody was going to hang out for the day. We were going to do that later in the evening, but before that, we decided to drive to Schaumburg, Illinois from Rockford, down I-90 to go shopping. I hadn't gotten the Easter dress yet, and she's like, let's go shop. So we did, and had a great day, had amazing conversation that day. She kind of said some things that didn't really connect with me yet, until later down the road. But we had probably the most meaningful conversation we've had in our entire relationship. And on the way home, I was driving, and seatbelt laws were relatively new in Illinois at the time. She and I were talking. She was funny. She had this like louder than life laugh, just this big, boisterous personality. And she thought it was hilarious that my shoe was so big on her. I just bought a new pair of shoes. I'm like an 8.5. She was like a 6. And so she puts my shoe on and she plops it up on the dashboard of the car. I was laughing just kind of like a maniac. And I was laughing more at her laughing. Like whatever she was doing wasn't actually funny, but just her laugh was contagious, you know? So I'm laughing, I'm looking at her, and all of a sudden I veer over onto the shoulder of the road. We were on I-90 west at the time, we were coming up on the Belvedere exit there, if anybody's familiar with that location. And I laughing at her, and as I did, I veered off. And at first we hit a mile marker, and I thought, oh crap, what am I going to tell my dad about my car? You know, I was just that was the thought process. And then instead of just slowing down, instead of just braking, I panicked and I turned my wheel to the right. We were going 65, 70 miles an hour down the highway. And my car flipped 6 times. And neither one of us were wearing our seatbelts. And so I was thrown about 75 feet from the car, going 65 miles an hour, landed on my feet in the ditch. Rolled onto my side, got up, walking around right away, trying to find Christy, who had landed in the middle of the highway, and had, by the time I found her, had severe trauma to the back of her head. And it's a scene that I don't ever, unless I'm talking to somebody privately, I don't go into detail of what I saw that day, because I don't think that's good for her parents to hear. I don't think it's how I want her to be remembered, but I saw a lot of really hard things that day. That people really shouldn't have to see. And so they revived her. They lost her there on the highway. Those are the last words I heard before I was put in my own ambulance, was we lost her. They airlifted her to a local hospital. They had revived her on the way. And early the next morning, which was Easter morning of 1993, Christy never regained consciousness, but she went to be with Jesus that Easter morning of 1993. And so we are on 31 years now that she's been gone. But it shaped me immensely. I hated myself for what happened. I blamed myself for what happened, which I think is a normal thing to do probably in that kind of situation. And I carried that guilt and shame for a long time. And because I didn't know what to deal with it, it came out in negative self-destructive behaviors at that time. So, I mean, that's the gist of where I was at that point, at that season of my life.
Yep. So you were battling very serious grief at a very young age.
19. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And not just grief, but guilt. And how to move on. Because, I mean, my grief, even though I did blame myself, like when my cousin committed suicide on my 16th birthday, it's kind of, there's life. It's a before and after moment. There's life before, and you're never going to go back to life like that again. No. And there's no way for people to really, truly understand what you're going through. So it's really lonely, right? Especially at that age.
At that age and in that season of time, I mean, in the 1990s, we didn't have internet, right? We didn't have cell phones where I could just text someone that I was having a hard day. We didn't have any of that technology to where I couldn't follow somebody's. There weren't podcasts, there weren't blogs, like that didn't exist. And so there wasn't like I could even Google finding a support group of other people who had gone something like that. I couldn't follow an account and get encouragement from it. Like that stuff didn't exist. And so I didn't know anybody who had gone through anything like that before. Um, and and what was really difficult at that time was I I wanted people to understand that I was struggling, but I didn't want them to feel sorry for me. And so I it was this kind of impossible um position I put people in. Like, I want you to know, but I just want you to know by osmosis. And I don't want you to feel sorry for me. And I don't want to see pity in your eyes, but I want you to care. But I don't know how to handle it either. And so it just became this thing of I just found it easier to be what was easier for other people to handle. Um, and so I just became what they needed me to be, which
Mhm.
was okay. I I I played the part to be okay, and really just stuffed it all down. And I think I say that in the book, I was pouring into the lives of people who were probably already filled up more than I was to begin with. I didn't have anything to give them. They were probably in a healthier place spiritually and mentally in that time than I was. Um, but it just kind of felt like that's what I needed to do to kind of get through it to the other side.
Yeah, kinda survive. It's like this it potentially can be avoidance, but then it's also, like, at least a positive form of coping so that you can get through each day.
Yeah, I mean, even just as we have learned, in the passing of my daughter Sydney that we'll talk about later, but even as I've been watching my son Carson grow in grief as children, and I know I'm technically 19, I wasn't a child, um, but I kind of was still to a degree, and the kind of the natural way of dealing with grief and trauma is avoidance because I have to be able to keep moving on. And so that just I think that becomes our default unless we're like forced to do otherwise.
Yeah, and I had written that down in my notes that you had said in the book, "I was determined to make it easy for people to be around me."
Yeah.
And I think that you hit on a really great point because when we're grieving or when we even feel like it's kind of horrible, but I go through battles where I feel I'm like, I don't want to be emotionally needy. But then I'm
Mhm.
like, I do have emotional needs. I don't know why it's hard for me to honor those and kind of find that balance. Do you find that to be true for you?
Yeah, for sure. Now where I'm at now in life, I am a little better at vocalizing what I need and saying what I need and with that and I'm totally kind of okay with who I am enough to do that with my husband, with my friends, just kind of respectfully, I don't know, demanding or claiming what it is that I need in those moments. Um and for me, I mean just for me, yeah, it's easy for me to articulate what it is I need or to be able to recognize when something is really starting to hit or it's going to hit or I can just kind of tell in seasons. And I know what works for me and now I can articulate that. In that season, I did not have any idea what that was. This was the first real thing. Things like this weren't really talked about a whole lot. And and so it was, going to a counselor, which my parents were great at getting me in to talk to someone. But I also just told them whatever they needed to hear so I could get through that and move on to the other side of it. So it took years to get to a healthy place of grieving with that. Um, I hung out with people who weren't super great for me or to me. I would do things that kind of seemed to end up punishing myself because I felt like I needed to be punished for. And listen, I can say this now, my actions or reactions caused the death of my best friend. And so I still don't, it wasn't intentional, obviously. Um, I I also believe God is sovereign, and that nothing happens without being filtered through his fingers. And so I've come to a place of accepting that as well. Um, but I had to, kind of start coming to that place of I killed my friend. And that's a hard pill to swallow without kind of falling over the deep end. So I had to kind of start figuring that out of what does that mean? It was an unintentional um, reaction to a accidental situation. And when you kind of put it into terms, that led to the death of a person. And that's a little bit more clinical for me to accept, right? It's a little bit more of a better explanation. In that season, it was really hard. Yeah. And there were some people um, who expected more from me in that season. And I'm really careful about that because I love people who were in ministry and such around in and around me, but who expected me to be an example. And I don't think I should have been an example. I think someone needed to give me permission to fall apart
Yeah,
and rebuild. I was
100%.
never given that permission. I'm not
Oof.
blaming anybody at
Yeah,
all. But
yeah,
as I look back on it now and I look through it with different eyes, I see that probably wasn't the healthiest, um,
yeah.
environment in that moment.
Yeah. And especially as at that age, for sure. And
Yeah,
even now, I think at our ages with our grieving, now it comes down to a lot of times us giving ourselves
exactly.
permission
Yes.
and asking the people closest to us. But back then that would be something that you didn't know how to do that for yourself, you
No.
know? So I want to talk about Sydney.
Sure.
So this is years later. Yesterday was a really big day. Can
It
you
was.
talk about yesterday?
Yeah. Yeah. So yesterday, November 7th, was the 15-year anniversary from when my 11-year-old daughter, Sydney, died of a terminal brain tumor. She had been diagnosed 18 months prior to that with an inoperable terminal brain tumor. So at diagnosis, she was terminal. And she was 9.5 at the time of diagnosis. And like I said, we had 18 amazing, beautiful, difficult months with her. And so, yeah, yesterday was weird. We're also walking through hospice with my father-in-law right now, who has Lewy body dementia, and he's in stages of things. And so it was extra weird to walk through a hospice scenario again. They literally live up the block from us right now, so we can just run up there when something's needed. And um, it's just, yeah, it was very surreal to be walking through both of those, the emotions and the memories of my daughter's last days and the reality of his last days at the same time. And it just brought back a lot of similarities and a lot of, real moments. And that was yesterday. Yeah. So it's very strange that we're at 15 years, right? I mean, that seems insane that
Yep.
it's been 15 years because it feels like yesterday, but then it feels like forever since I've seen her and held her and saw her beautiful eyes and her smile. And so in some ways it feels much longer. It feels like a lifetime, which it has been longer than her lifetime. Since I've seen her. Her life was 11 years and it's been 15 since I've seen her. So I've been without her for longer than I was with her. And that is really a kind of crazy thing to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. And I think even the listeners right now are trying to wrap their minds around how you've gone through so much and yet you are a beacon of light and hope and encouragement to other people, specifically in this season of your life, people that are going through similar things that you went through, which I think on average, unless someone's taken the journey with you, they're like, "I don't even understand how she can do that." Like, how could she possibly surround herself with people who remind her of the hardest season of her life? And to that, I guess I would say, and I think you need to read her book to really understand it, but only Jesus.
1,000%. For sure, only Jesus. And I honestly, because I do talk with people from around the world. One of the people who is one of my mentees right now, lives in the UK, who their child was a patient at St. Jude. I have also, on the global aspect of things we're able to do with St. Jude, we talk with doctors and other clinicians from around the world, and trying to help them rally bereaved parents to come together in their institutions around the world and help provide better end of care life and bereavement care um, in other countries. So we're really excited about what's developing there and maybe how we can utilize that in different places moving forward in this next year and kind of being hands and feet in some of those places. But all of that to say, um, I can talk with somebody who has a different faith than me, and I can use the generalized terms of
Mhm.
peace and comfort. And
Sure.
of course, we don't tell our story without talking about Jesus because it's not possible. Um, but I truly don't understand how a person walks through this with the hope and promise. I mean, they don't have the hope and promise we have if they're not holding to the hand of Jesus. And so, I have to kind of generalize terms when I'm talking with them, like, you know, when they're talking about their child being in a better place and different things. And I believe they are. I'm not saying their child's not. I'm just saying in the grief following that, it's, I don't know how people are standing without Jesus.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk through a couple things that I got out of your book that I think are really valuable insight if somebody is grieving right now, or if they are near to someone in their life, a family member, a friend that is going through grief. And I think you have a lot of really amazing insights from your story, your experience, and then what you've chosen to do with that pain. And so let's talk about first what happens when we ignore our needs and grief and we let it grow in those dark places and we shove it down.
Yeah.
What happens there?
Yeah. So I describe it in the book. It's very similar to cancer. So a grief ignored it's the same as a cancer ignored, right? So when we stuff it down, when we, logically in America, if we find out we have cancer or we think there's a possibility, and we find out that it's there, we do something about it, right? We generally don't just ignore that and just move about our day and pretend it's not there. Because what's going to happen if it does? If you pretend it's not there, it's going to pop up in places where it didn't originate. It's going to travel through your bloodstream to other places in your body. It's going to wreak havoc on your entire body, and you will be you'll be worse off than if you would have just addressed it in the beginning, right? And it's not something you want to dive into and address, but it's a necessity that you do. Nobody wants to have surgery or chemotherapy or radiation. Nobody wants to do those things, but not doing those things leads you worse off for the wear in most situations. Um, the same is a grief ignored, right? If you stuff it down and you pretend it's not there and you try to act like I did, when we were talking about Christy, and there's no grief there, it's fine and moving forward, right? It starts to grow in those dark places. And it travels through your body and it goes through your bloodstream and it pops up in places where it didn't originate, and it comes out in ugliness and, for me, negative, destructive behaviors. And um, there, I was so much worse off than if I had dealt with it really with my counselors or really with people who are around me and really worked through that process. I was worse off for the wear. And so I definitely encourage people now, because when Sydney was diagnosed, I didn't share it with anybody when Christy died. I I journaled. Sometimes I wrote things. I actually have a book that I wrote about her after she died, that made its way into this to some degree. It was called Letters to Christy, and I was kind of just telling her everything that I felt in those moments, because she would have been the person I would have processed things with. And but the moment Sydney was diagnosed, I just decided I'm sharing this. I'm gonna write. It was a Caring Bridge journal at the time. I'm gonna write in that like I'm writing to myself, and I'm gonna put it out there in the universe. And I'm not keeping it to myself this time. I had discovered what not to do from my grief before, and I was like, I am going to be the antithesis of that this time, and I'm going to process that in a healthier way, for sure.
Hey, ladies, I just had to take just a minute to tell you that the Build Your Brave Experience recordings are now available. They have been edited and they are incredible. Encouragement, the powerful sessions, the amazing worship. I'm just saying, I have re-listened to them again and again because there's so much that I hear every time. And I just want to tell you, if you're needing some inspiration, some encouragement, maybe you need to get fired up, or maybe you just need to know that you are not alone. Girl, these are the recordings. They're what you need, and they're what you want in your ear. And trust me, you're not going to regret investing in yourself to have these. So listen, you can either go to meganvalentine.co, or you can just text me at 808-500-7756 and just text the word playback. We will get you the link to order those recordings and get them in your ear, and more importantly, in your heart and spirit today. Because no matter what you're going through, no matter what setbacks, obstacles, insecurities, no matter the fear, or maybe you're thriving and you want to go to the next level, wherever you're at, these are going to help you get there. All right. So be sure and check them out today. You know, I kind of make you out to be like really godly and spiritual in how you're handling your grief right after you hear this, but it was not pretty. I mean, you had learned healthier ways, but you were still angry at God. You were
Yeah.
still like having days where you were completely triggered, and in your book you call it like bumped. Like even
Yes.
15 years later, you have those days. So what would you say to someone who's grieving um about that, and kind of maybe being gentle with yourself, but also like I don't know, what would you say?
I would say it's twofold. So first, I would say get one or two people in your life. Megan was one of about three women that I reached out to in those seasons. And preferably, it's somebody who loves you enough to tell you what you need to hear and not just what you want to hear. Because a lot of times when a person is grieving, we're going to tell them they deserve anything to make them happy. And that's not going to really help you all the time, right? Because what if getting drunk every night makes me happy? What if taking drugs makes me happy? What if, being promiscuous makes, I'm not saying those things were what I was struggling with, but I'm just saying people, like, you can't just like yes man people into being in healthy places. So if you can find people who will speak truth in love into your life and care enough about you, and Megan was one of those people in my life, and I knew ahead of time. I know, I just knew I needed it. And so sometimes it was just a text message that was like, I'm not okay today, and could you just pray? And I knew they would be. I also was just like, I don't want to talk about it right now. I don't want to say it again. I felt like I was saying it too much. And they would check in on me later. But also Dean and I were really struggling. My husband, Dean, were really struggling in that moment because we handled grief very, very differently. Dean had never had an up close personal loss in his life. He lost his 99 and a half year old grandmother, which was a normal, natural thing to do, who prayed that she would never be 100 because she didn't want anybody to send her picture into Willard Scott on the Today Show. You know how like they used to have the people, you know, like if they were 100, they would have, she never
Yes.
wanted her picture to be on there. So she was like, I don't live to be 100. So she was ready to go to heaven at 99 and a half. And so that was very different than walking through brain tumor diagnosis with your daughter, being a dad. That's hard enough already, right? You were talking about you may or may not be married to someone who doesn't like to acknowledge grief and things like that. So Dina's kind of revolutionized that. That's another conversation, but he's changing the culture literally around the world, and some work that he's doing right now in men grieving in healthy ways. But at that time, he had no clue. And so I was I had this other experience, and he was really struggling, and it was, to the point of needing, clinical psychologists involved. And this is not, I would say this if he was here in the room. So it's not a secret. We share this stuff openly. And so, and sometimes medications work, and sometimes they're the complete wrong medication, and they have the total opposite effect of what they should be doing. And that's what we were dealing with. That's what I was dealing with when Sydney died. So I'm walking through my own grief, and I'm walking through it with this person who is having irrational thought processes and, all this kind of thing. So there was a point in time where I kind of talked to Megan and Jen and Lisa and a few other people, and I'm just like, I think I have to walk away. Because in my head, the only thing I could think about was my son Carson, who was 8, and myself. We just needed to have peace. And that was all I was working 1,000% toward, was just peace, because I couldn't help Dean in that way. Just in case you guys know, sometimes you can't be the person to help your spouse. You can be there and you can be a support. Your spouse isn't going to have all the answers, especially if you're both grieving the same person, especially if it's a child or somebody very close to you. You're going to handle that grief differently. And sometimes you have nothing left to offer another person. It's a little more natural for me to naturally take my son, right? That's parenting. I mean, being a parent is more unconditional than being a spouse. It's definitely like my kid could spit on me and I'd be like, oh, come on, let's go figure this out. But, Dean can like not compliment me on something and I'm like, forget you, whatever. But I'm just saying, like, we don't, it's not as conditional, right? Or unconditional, I should say, as it is with our children. And so I just kept saying, like, probably need to just figure this out. And you guys spoke, you're like, that's not what God wants right now. And that is not going to help in the long term. That's not a decision you should be making in this frame of mind. And they were just like, yeah, you can't do that. And I even remember Megan saying, I saw a post you did last night, and probably other people don't realize it, but that was about Dean, and you need to take that down. It was like something like an Instagram something or something I like spewed about. And I was like, crap. Okay. She's like calling me out on it, but it was good. I needed that. I needed someone to like put the guardrails of my own behavior in those moments. And so I would say that's part one of that question you asked me 45 minutes ago. But that part of it. The other part is realizing what you need in those moments. And it might take you a little bit to figure that out. I was at a Day of Remembrance event at St. Jude, our first event that we went to. So at St. Jude, at that time, 2 years after your child dies, you're invited back to this event. Now we have expanded it. Now we help run the show, but now it is for families 5 years up to after they've lost their child. So we just had an event 2 weeks ago where we had 500 people, which sucks, right? Because why we're there because we lost children, and that sucks. But it's also awesome that St. Jude is still helping to care for those individuals and stuff. So anyway, we were at our first one, and this lady, Wendy Avery, was speaking. She was leading a family panel, which now Dean does that job. And she said this. She said she was talking about difficult days and hard times, and she's like, sometimes I stay in my pajamas for a day. And she said, sometimes I stay in my pajamas for 2 days. And then I get up and I get back to the business of life. And you have to do that sometimes. Just like sometimes I keep the cover pulled over my head. And that was so empowering to me, from this person that had to act like everything was okay when I was 19, right? And I had to pretend that I was fine so people could enjoy being around me. I had, later started to figure out it's not my job to make people enjoy being around me, right? I mean, if they're not connecting with who I am as a person or willing to be there in, the less entertaining moments of life, then they don't need to be that up close in my life. And maybe they have a different role in my life. I'm not saying I'm writing them off, but maybe they don't deserve to be as up close in my inner circle of people. And so, and also, to be careful. I talk to Dean a lot about that. Dean is 1,000% an open book. And I'm like, some people deserve those details and some people haven't earned the right to know those things. So it's not lying to not tell somebody everything about you, right? That's not lying. You're just being very careful with who you give that information to. But I have learned. So yesterday, I blocked 2 days off of doing things. Today is one of those days, but this is weirdly invigorating for me to take, and it fills me to take the hard things. I would much rather be doing something productive with the stuff I'm sitting in than just sitting in it sometimes. But yesterday I sat in them. I put up my Christmas tree because Sydney loved Christmas and we loved doing that together, and I love it. A lot of bereaved parents, grieving people don't like celebrating Christmas because it's too hard with memories and traditions, and that's okay too. They can do whatever works for their families, and that's it. I want to empower people to say, you know what, I can't come to that family gathering this time. Maybe next year I'll be able to. Or can we do it a little differently? Because when we did it the same way all the time, that just makes me more aware that our loved one's not there. Or you're like, I'm okay with going along with that part of it, but I'll do my other stuff in my own way to honor my own little ritual or tradition or whatever that is. And so for me, I just put up the tree and watched stupid Christmas movies like the Netflix ones that don't really have a plot, but that have beautiful scenery, right? They're in Scotland or something. And I'm like, oh, and their clothes are really cute. But I just kind of had those on while I was putting the tree up. Dean, usually it's better. I used to try to make it a day where we were all together. I kind of forced them to be with me. Carson as well. He's now 23 and married, so I'm not going to be like, you have to come sit with me. But I would always try to orchestrate this special thing. And Dean goes crazy just sitting still, and I need to sit still. And so he just went to work, and we went to Chili's last night because that was Sydney's favorite place. We just kind of went to Chili's because it just felt like that's where we should go. But I just, at home, I kind of stayed in a bubble of Christmas yesterday and tried to block out politics for a minute and just looked at pictures of my daughter, and some of them made me cry a lot. And some of them made me smile, and little videos. I just let myself be immersed in all things Sydney. And then today I kind of blocked it off too, because generally what happens is I'll get through the day, and then the next day my immune system will be like, I hate you, and crash, and cold sores or whatever. So I'm like, I'm going to be kind to myself for another day and kind of block out, and I'm just not available for things I don't want to be available for today. And so I think that's twofold. I'm sorry, this is a really long answer to your question, but I think it's important to have people in your life who speak truth and tell you things that you need to hear, not just what you want to hear, and figuring out what your boundaries are. Sometimes I say, sometimes my grief comes out in, I will say, witchy attitudes. I will say that instead of the other word I want to say. It can come out in, I'm very like and sometimes I'm like, you just probably don't want to talk to me today. And just like, unless I'm talking to you or unless you absolutely need something, just pretend I'm not here. And then we get through the day fine, you know. But and Dean is the opposite and needs my attention in those moments. And I've learned that too. So I tried to be a little fluid, and because if it were me, I would have just like, I'm not putting makeup on, I'm not leaving the house, I'm not doing anything. Like, he's like, let's go to Chili's, let's go. I'm like, okay, we can do that. I can compromise and we can do that. So that's
Oh,
my little way, but it's definitely you finding what works for you and your family and your life and what brings you comfort or reprieve, I guess.
yeah. Yep. I love that. And I want to point out a couple things that you really said so that everyone really got them
Mhm.
because your grief journey is your grief journey and it's going to look so different than everybody and it's probably complicated. Um at least mine is. Maybe some people's isn't, that's they cuz whatever they don't want to go there. But I think being able to honor each other's
Um,
differences and like Tosh, I'm just like really proud of you and I'm honored just to know you and to have watched you through this journey. And you really are a light to so many people. Um, and yes, because of the work you do at St. Jude, and yes, because, of your book and like these things. But like now you've been married for what is this year 26 years? Are you married
Valentine's
26?
Day will be 27 on Valentine's Day.
Okay. And I'm
Yep.
like, in grief, all of the negative sides of grief could have caused you to walk away from that. And instead, Carson has been able to watch you guys choose healing and choose love and choose forgiveness. And it hasn't been perfect, but like you continued to choose each other. And I think Sid would be so proud of who you guys are and the work that you do. And I know she always told you, like, well, it was worth it then, mom, even as you shared with her the testimonies of because you were so public with her 18-month journey,
Right.
um, it not just in our community, but that reached far and wide
Right.
through the nation and through the world, and so she, even while she was alive, was like, "It's all for Jesus," and, I mean, you missed out if you did not know this beautiful little girl who loved to sing, and she loved the Jonas Brothers, and she loved, singing to Jesus, and she sang at our church. I can't remember. I don't know how long it was before she passed that she did that, but, like, she was in the wheelchair and she, like, sang to the church, a large church, and, like, those moments, she was always just such a light, and so I just wanted to honor you because I love that you're sharing from the hard parts and that also we get to see 15 years later the amazing things that have come. It's still hard, like, days like yesterday, like, it's still so hard and those waves of grief hit you, but you're now able to show people like that there are less hard days and don't make big decisions in that season. I do want to talk about this because I think it's important and I think it's not something just you and I experience, but I think it's something that's common when you're grieving is I want to talk about um, just a couple more things before we wrap up. But one is how tragedy and loss changes your circle um, because people just can't some people, they for whatever reason, and it doesn't mean they're bad, they just don't have the ability or they don't know what to do or they won't lean into the heart or whatever. Some of the people that you really thought would be your ride or dies and you thought would take the journey with you and you thought would check in on you and show up the way they used to show up when you were fun and life was easier. Um, they don't do that anymore. And that's a whole nother additional grief on top of your grief. And I've experienced that even in the last however many years, was just some things that we've gone through. And that for me was like, I was like, wait, wasn't expecting this grief on top of the grief that I was already going through. But when you're giving yourself permission to grieve and not having to make everybody else be okay, you do lose some people. So, can you just talk through that for a minute? You lose people, but you also gain people, and God's good like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird in that part of the journey, with Sydney's specifically, of, the people who just kind of like came in my house and opened my fridge and kind of helped themselves, and they were that at home in my place. Um, didn't come to the door as often and didn't walk into the door, and at first it wasn't like a keeping score. I really wasn't like, oh, they haven't been by this many times, and it wasn't that. It was just something I kind of started to notice, right? And you just kind of start to see, them less and less. And I really think, this is so. I'll try to keep it brief, but one of the phrases that I've really learned to become familiar with and really strive to live in is compassion. And compassion actually means, with the root word, I've been able to sit under Dr. Justin Baker, who was the head of everything at St. Jude. He's at Stanford. He's somewhere in California right now. But he gave this lecture, and it's always stayed with me. The root word, the Latin word root of the word compassion is compati, which means to suffer with. The reason we call it Passion Week when Jesus died is because he was suffering. And so that's what passion is. So to co-passion means I am going to suffer with this person. And so many of us, and I think if we have believers on here, if we're talking to Christian population, we have to learn how to be uncomfortable in the comforting of others. We have to learn how to, sometimes you're just sitting in silence and they don't have anything to say. That is the hardest thing for me to do, because I'm a pastor's kid who always felt like if the teacher in Sunday school said, hey, what do you guys think about this? And if someone wasn't talking, you were like, all right, I will. And then you just, you kind of like carry the conversation. It's so hard for me to sit in uncomfortable silence and just let a person be who doesn't want to talk, but they just need a presence, right? So we have to kind of learn how to not have all the answers, to not pretend that we have the answers, to just be a present. It's okay to say, I don't know how to fix this. I don't have anything that's going to make this better for you, but I'm here. And so, we had people. And then on the other side of that, we had the people that showed up who were maybe just acquaintances before. Some people maybe we hadn't really ever met prior to Sydney's story being shared publicly. Like, show up at my house the morning after she died. We were all sleeping in the living room floor because we couldn't bear to be in my room where she had died. We didn't want to be in separate rooms. We just threw blankets on the floor and slept in the living room. And I woke up to the smell of donuts and their feet, like at my, their shoes at eye level on the floor. And they brought me donuts. And I didn't want to eat. I had no intention of eating donuts. But the donuts weren't the reason they were there. They were the vehicle. They were the excuse for them to come to our house that day. And they were like, we just have to show up. All we have to bring are donuts, but we just need to be here. And those are the kinds of people that have like stuck with us, And so, yeah, you do suffer that, and you have to have grace, because it's usually not intentional that they take step back. Either they haven't matured enough to know how to handle it, they have never experienced it before. And if I don't want people to fully understand what I feel. Megan, I never want you to understand what I feel, because that would mean you would have to lose a child in order to feel exactly how I feel. I don't want you to ever experience that. And if I had not lost a child and I was trying to, come potty or, if I was trying to walk alongside somebody, I don't know if I would have handled it perfectly well either because they don't get it. They don't understand. So that was a big part of it, losing people or at least not having them in your up close life. And then the peripheral people who were kind of just around who just are like, wait, we're in your family now and we're here and we want to be your friends. And, you know, that
Yep.
God does really cool things like that.
Yep. And I loved that reminder because, there are people who, for whatever reason, they just can't or aren't going to be the ones that that are supporting you, that are there, that are checking on you, and for whatever reason, it just might be too much for them. And I had to get to a place where I was like, I need to release these people that have released me. And just trust that God is going to meet my need. And this is everything that you've talked about, and you talk about it so well in your book, is that when we're grieving, yeah, sure, we want our spouse to say the right thing and understand. And sure, we want, the people around us to have compassion and get it. And sure, but they really can't completely understand. And the only one that can really fill that void and that need is the Lord. And so, though in those seasons we're tempted to go away from him because we don't understand his plan, it's only in drawing near to him that we get the kind of peace that only God can give. And so, Tasha and I just want to encourage you. And one of these quotes that I loved what you said was, it wasn't that he would never give me more than I could handle. It's that he would give me all I needed to handle all that came my way. And I love that because most days when you're in a grieving season, can feel beyond overwhelming.
Mhm.
And so, yes, you're being given more than you can handle. But
100%.
right? But he's also going to give you the people, the resources, the strength. Even if I kind of remind myself, like, it's like to make it through another day.
Yes.
And it's like manna. I mean, it's just, he's going to
Mhm.
give you enough. He's going to be your source. He's going to be your portion. But it's also going to be a season where you have to be dependent on him. And it's probably mine. It runs out at the end of the day. And then I got to go back for more the next morning. Right. And so I want to end by talking about this because what's really incredible about you guys is not just the healing journey that you guys have taken through all of this grief, but what you're doing with it, the way that you have turned your pain into purpose. And I want you to talk about kind of this new endeavor that you're on, this so that
Yeah.
journey. Can you share with us that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that the kind of natural thing for any person to do when they come up against a trial or a death or a lot. I mean, we're talking about grief here, and we happen to be talking about people, but that it can be anything. It can be, COVID caused like a loss of way of life for people, right? And or when things change drastically in your life and you grieve the way that it used to be. So it doesn't have to just be the loss of an individual or a loved one. It can be a loss of many different things. Um, but when something happens like that, I think it's natural for us to look and search for a why. And man, I've been down that road and I know it's a natural process, but I don't think there's ever going to be an answer on this side of heaven that will fully satisfy you, right? Because I can say, well, Sydney touched a bunch of lives, Christine, but at the end of the day, I'm like, but I mean, was there more to that? Like, couldn't that have happened a different way? And it can leave you disillusioned, discouraged. You can doubt your faith when you are searching for a why to an endless endeavor. But if you look for purpose, you will find that every single time. So if you open your eyes and you look for something that you can do with the thing that happened to you, and maybe just that's an extra sense of I'm going to have compassion and I'm going to just go check on my neighbor because I haven't seen them in a few days. And I want to make sure they're doing okay. All right. So it doesn't have to be this start a nonprofit, go change the world. Like it doesn't have to be this nth degree thing. And it can definitely include those things, but it can be the smallest thing of ministering to your family. This is sometimes the hardest to do. or checking in on a neighbor, or doing, little things of kindness, volunteering in your local church, like whatever that looks like. But it also can lead to big things. And so one of the things, the verses that has always reverberated with me is 2 Corinthians 1:4. I'm paraphrasing, but he comforts us in all of our afflictions so that we can comfort others as he has comforted us through our struggles. And so that is the pocket, right? So that is the answer. Why has this thing happened to me? Or what can I do with this thing that's happened to me? So that, like totally holding a toothpick over here in my hand, so that we can comfort others. It's such a simple verse. It just really stood out to me one day when I was on this journey of finding this why. And God comforted us so much so that it should overflow. Like, it's more than we can contain, right? And it's going to flow out of our cup and should overflow to the people around us. And so if that gives great purpose, man, there's just something healing when you can get outside of your own head, when you stop looking at your own pain and your heart starts to break for the pain of others. Not in an avoidance way, because that's definitely possible to do. Like, if you're just so, I'm going to go do this, so I don't have to pay attention to my own pain. I'm not talking about that. But when you're getting in, start small. But when you're getting in a healthy place, there's something very healing and meaningful if you can take that into others. So we definitely find that in the work we do at St. Jude is very meaningful to us, very purposeful to us. Writing this book, anything that I can do that can help another individual on a similar journey, I'm like, sign me up, because God comforted me in a way that I cannot describe, but I'm going to at least show another person, how God can comfort them in a way that you can't describe. And in that, like, passing on, it impacts people in huge ways, and it grows me, and it heals me, and it gives me so much meaning. So yeah, I have big dreams for So That. There's going to be a So That ministry sometime here soon, and I really want to empower others in a way to raise them up and kind of train them and educate them on how they can take the thing in their own life and use that in a way to help others. And I guess I can be in big or small ways. All of them are impactful. And for us, we're just going to walk through every door God opens. If we have been given a platform, I sit on the ethics committee of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. First parent to be asked, and one of two parents to be asked, and we were the first two that sit on the ethics committee. And I don't have a college degree, and I'm sitting here at this table with these very important people, and I'm talking about real life situations. And I don't ever say, well, the Bible says you should do this, because that's not where we're at. But everything I do or say or think has biblical mindset to it. And so if I can influence in that way, if I can, what's the word I'm looking for? If I can inject that into that culture, so we're at this place of like, if God opens the door and if we find favor with people and whatever that is, we're going to do it, because that's what he's calling us to do. And if you just come with that attitude about it and say, God, you open the doors, and I'm just opening my eyes to your purpose. Henry Blackaby, and I did quote him in the book. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him. I love Henry Blackaby so much, but I did his study, Experiencing God. And he says, God is at work around you. It is our job to open our eyes to see where he's working and to join him in it. And so literally just stop doing this for a minute. And then just unless that's the place you see where he's, maybe that's where you see that, oh, I want to do that too. But just look up, take your eyes off your own stuff for a minute and look around you and just see where God is working. And sometimes he's working behind the scenes to pull you into something that he has had prepared for you since the foundation of time. And had you not walked through the stuff you walked through, you would not be prepared to even move forward and do that. And you are the person for such a time as this. You are the person he is calling up for that. Sydney told us, Dean and I say this all the time, we're not sure if we would still be married had we not walked through the illness and death of our daughter, because there was stuff that a lot of other people fully justify leaving their marriages over, things that we probably shouldn't have walked away from a marriage on, but we could have justified doing that if we got fed up enough, right? And and so when Sydney was sick and died, it fortified us to not ever let anybody think that her death, illness, passing had anything to do with breaking up our marriage. We didn't want anybody to think of that testimony eventually, Megan, because I had good people speaking into my life as well. And we determined that we had to do the hard work that was involved in staying married. And not just staying married, but like staying married and actually liking each other. And so, and Sydney had this, because she died in November, and she always had like paperwork, like not paperwork, but like notepads or whatever, or stationery in a bag. She was like a little old lady, and she'd have a bag, and she'd have like gum and 500 chapsticks and anything that she needed her hands on right away, because she couldn't just get up and walk to go get what she wanted. So she'd have little notebooks and things. And I don't know when she did this, but there was in my bedside table in an envelope a little note, and this pretty stationery, and it said, "Happy anniversary, Valentine's Day, Mom and Dad," in very sloppy handwriting with her left hand because she could no longer use her right hand. And when we opened it up, it said, "Happy anniversary, you two love each other." She was reminding us that we loved each other. And so I say all of that to say, I don't know if we would have gotten to that place had we not walked through the hard things. And our relationship is so much richer and deeper and more meaningful, and I think more powerful. And we've never been so singularly focused on what we want our future to be than we are right now. And in that way, we can thank God for all of the things that we've had to walk through, because he uses it. He will absolutely use it. So it's horrible, it's awful, it's tragic, and it's beautiful. And it's healing all at the same time.
I love that. I hope this was helpful today, because I know that life is hard and there's a lot of hurting people in this world. And I know you've gone through something, you're going through something, or you're about to go through
Mhm.
something. And that goes for all the people around you. So we're constantly bumping into people who are grieving. And so I hope this episode was really helpful for all of you in giving yourself permission to grieve, in maybe need to look in the mirror and say, stop avoiding that grief.
Mhm.
Allow yourself to feel that and process that. But also finding the balance in that. And especially going into the holidays, which I know is just a hard time for a lot of people. So I hope you feel encouraged today. And I hope you'll follow Tasha on Instagram, and we'll link all this stuff in the show notes, and you'll get this book, and you'll get to know her, start following their journey, see what they're up to. Maybe right now you're even saying, hey, my church needs to have some people come and share and speak. I mean, I think we've come a long way when it
Mhm.
comes to, you know, divorce groups and recovery groups and stuff. And we need more grief groups. We need to help not even just grieving people, but in general, we need to help the church and the believers be able to walk into a grieving world and know how to suffer with, know
Good.
how to have compassion, know how to love, because someone who is grieving is also at a place where God could move in a mighty way in their life. And prayerfully, hopefully, we can be the kind of people that would show them the kind of Christ like love that could suffer with them,
Yes.
not have to know it perfect, not have to say all the right things, but be able to show up in a really vulnerable season in their life and allow them to see Christ. And so I love that. So if that's something that you want for your church, or maybe you have your own podcast and you want Tasha on, we want Sydney's story to get out there. Dean and Tasha have done so much work, and it's amazing the doors that are opening for them, but they are just getting started. And we want to see that, so that ministry, like where we can overflow with hope and love, right? We want to get that out there. So, Tasha, any closing words to everybody that's been listening, or that you want to kind of say as we wrap up?
I really appreciate you, Megan, and I appreciate you having me on here, and all of the things that you do to empower people in their personal lives and in their walk with God, in their businesses, and whatever that looks like. You have this ability of doing that. And I just also want to encourage anybody listening to just to know that you're not alone, that what you're feeling in your grief does not make you crazy. Um, it doesn't make you abnormal. Um, and if the people around you don't quite get you, that's okay, because that happens. And if you're somebody who's around someone who's grieving, they're not crazy. They're just going through the emotions that you haven't had to experience. And I pray you don't ever have to. But just be a presence. Just be a presence. Just don't give up on them. Just stay in their court, on their team, being willing to back them up on what they have going on. And finally, just to, when nobody else is around, Jesus is your all. He is the only thing that has stood help keep me standing. Some people call him a crutch, and I would say yes, he is, because I would not be standing without him. He has propped me up more times than not, and I would encourage you to lean into him.
I love that. Okay. So oftentimes we wrap up the episode by just having my guest pray for everyone. So do you want to just close us in prayer, and then
Sure.
we'll be done for today? Okay.
Dear Heavenly Father, I just lift up all of these people who are listening to this today, God, who didn't maybe know what they were going to hear when they showed up. God, maybe this has kind of bumped some of their own feelings, God, and brought up some hard things that they've endured or walked through their lives, God. And I just pray that right now in this moment, you would be their comfort, God, that you would be close to them, that they would feel you near, God, that they would lean into you and your comfort, because you bring that perfect comfort and peace that only you can provide, God. And I pray that you would be with them in this moment, God. And I just pray for just us as a whole, God, that we would learn to be more compassionate, God, that we would learn how to companion with people who are suffering, and be open to participate in their suffering with them, God, as you have suffered for us, and how we can we have full freedom and salvation because of that, God. And it is not too much for us to be called to do that for others. And so I just pray that you bless everyone here, God, that you help empower them to do what they need to do to take care of themselves, to start dealing with the hard things in life, and processing those things in a positive way, in a healthy way, God. And I just pray that you bless them and keep them close to your side. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, friend, for being here. What a blessing. One of the original 7 OG Team Brave members right here, Tasha
One of
Ives.
the
So
originals.
one of the originals. I love you, girl, and I can't wait. We need to get to be in person at some point in our lives again, but we'll figure it out. Yes.
We
Even
love.
if we meet at maybe a country music concert or
For
something. I don't know.
sure. I'm on.
I love it. Okay. All right. Well, all of you, thanks for being here today. I hope it was helpful. Go and let's love our people well and shine bright. Have a great day.